It's about time I have gotten back to the game. Although I have had some doubts that these things might be real, even if I have got screenshots of the game itself. So just in case, I've decided that I will make sure I'm not hallucinating any of these things. And 3 different things will happen. Either everything turns out the way it should. It stays the same. Or something completely different happens. Time to go to the next world. Just a void of nothing. The only thing on screen is Solomon. The music, if you could call it that. Is this low-pitched sound of breathing? Ghosts? I walk for a while. Nothing. I try flying around. Shooting beams. Slashing. Nothing. Just the simple continuing sound of silence. What is that? And just like that, the game freezes, glitches, and crashes. This unnatural occurrence seems way out of normal things. I hope the game didn't reset. Erfrierung. Well, at least it's not hell. Erfrierung is this frost landscape. The music is a beautiful sounding theme. Sounds like the theme of a lost ruin with life flourishing around it. The new levels consist of Cold Lands, Forest, Snowman Sky, Glacier Lake, Frozen Cave, and Ice Town. The returning levels consist of the Blue Castle and the Artifact and Pedestal. The last 2 are unimportant considering they will most likely be a continuing trend to these maps. And also, a note regarding the maps. It can actually be zoomed in and out, which makes showing the whole map easier. With no other thing to show here, I will be going to the first few levels. Cold Lands is obviously a field of snow. It retains similar concepts as Heat Plains, a flat landscape with mountains. But while Heat Plains was more hot and desolate, Cold Lands is cold and lush to some degree. The music is a winter-like theme, with the accompaniment of bells and xylophones. A very happy-feeling theme for a safe-looking place. This level also seems to have friendly creatures grazing on the ground. These docile creatures that just feed on vegetation or a carcass and don't attack, are something I will refer to as fauna. Of course that won't doubt a carnivore's instincts though. But either way, the fauna consists of 3 different creatures. A small reptile with a tweezer-like tail, in which are very common here. A small ice bug, in which there was only one of them. And some other creature that looked very shrew-like. But I had forgotten to take a picture of it. The enemies, however, are very different to the slow-pacing fauna. The enemies only consist of these weird things that leap at you. They have this sort of pack hunting technique where they try to pin their adversary onto the ground and bite annoyingly in the process. If they didn't drop health, then I'd be dying rapidly without much of a chance. Another good thing that helps is their lack of strength. They only rely on their speed and already bad bite. But without any defense or enough health, they are easy enough to bring down. 1 minute goes by with not much else but the same leaping creatures. Eventually I encounter this weird thing. It seems a bit like that robot from Glacius. Except that this one is bigger. A darker gray. Stands like a gorilla. And has a gun on its back. It's not doing much aside from just standing there. Oh boy. No, not like this. I can't just die to these damn mechs. I might have gotten far but I won't be killed off that easily. That's another down. Last one remaining. Well, that was unnecessarily brutal. Arctaga may have been a savior, but it is still very vicious. Its battle concept works much like the first Temple minibus, with the same undulating piece mechanic. But unlike that old story, this one has a more free movement, making it a more threatening creature. And this creature has different abilities at its disposal. One of them is sitting in this familiar pose. and spitting spiked snowballs like a turret shooting bouncing bullets. The other is a method of digging underground and striking from below. They are besides very painful attacks. Easy enough to avoid. Well actually, I don't know if they would be painful. Because I'm avoiding it at all costs instead of facing it head on. After at least 3 minutes of avoiding the Archdag's attacks, it now gets very pissed off and attempts to throw its robot corpse at me. I am at least lucky enough to have avoided that. And due to its energy being constantly used up, it has now become very tired. And then, this guy just shows up and is getting close to the Archdag.
It's fine, Brilla. It's all good. You don't need to attack him. Good, Brilla. Why, you have come from a faraway land.
I will be very honest. I am very thankful that he got here. I however think I should let Solomon be the one to talk to this person. Obviously he greets with telling his name.
I am Sketch, the Favorino Sheriff of Erfrierung. My purpose here is to keep balance to this winter wonderland, both for wildlife and for Favorino kind.
From here I can see some very good things about him. His place in being the sheriff, and his desire to help his homeworld from going out badly, are an amazing thing he has at his disposal.
So what do you plan on doing here?
We are trying to restore balance to the galaxy. Will you join?
Are you saying I should join your team? Well, say no more. I'm joining in.
And with that, I have unlocked the first unlockable character. That goes aside from the main 3. The interesting looking Skitch. So before I get to the next 4 levels, it's time to show off the abilities that Skitch has. With his mobility not limited just to movement only from the controller, if Skitch moves, and stops moving, he will continue to slowly move forward or backwards due to his wheels. It makes a disadvantage if you bump into an enemy. But otherwise you could ride down a hill while you take a moment to do something else. His abilities include slashing with his clawed hands, and a most powerful kick in the game. It especially rivals Not Baragon. Mainly because the tires would shred through enemies with ease. One last move is to move faster and faster and be able to aim his beak towards an enemy. It can deal a lot of damage. With the enemy bleeding, it makes a good way to skewer through at least 3 leapers. An already good character to have. But now to move on to the rest of the map, to see how the rest of it is set to play out. Forest is actually easy to understand from the icon. A very chill forest. Much like the snow forest of Entropy. The music is rather calming. But unlike the other snow forest, in which had a more romantic tone, the tone of this one gives off a rather odd feeling. Like I have just started this whole thing. And there is no going back. It's not too irritating or assaulting. But it isn't too soothing. Just a feeling. The level itself is probably one of the longest levels by far. The only things around right now are the plants. Both the ones covered by the snow, shading from the sky, and the large pillars of wood in between. The fact that this section is devoid of enemies is probably the best bit, because the levels are usually chock full of enemies. This however makes a happy difference. The fauna is the only thing missing here. But it might show up later or so. As I roll along the snow dunes I find this large giraffe-like creature. It notices Skitch, but it isn't at all bothered. In fact, as I move along, there is a whole group of them, grazing on the trees, and making mysterious sounding vocalizations when communicating. But I feel like something is wrong. Something is watching from nearby. Then this group of leapers appears, while most of the giraffe either run or continue grazing. One of them, specifically a mother, is standing ground for the calf. Can't exactly argue. I'd do the same thing. In fact, these aren't the only 3. I need to fight through a lot of them. As I fight my way through the horde, I come across certain sights I wouldn't expect. To start off, this image shows a leaper struggling and screeching as it is crushed by a giraffe, while I push back one. Another is when these two leapers are attacking each other. It seems to be a fight to the death. I fairly have no idea why, but they are. It at least takes one more minute worth of carnage, until I see this large slab of snow in the middle of the forest. And the leapers are now gone. Something gives me an even worse feeling. Another enemy to attempt to prevent the continuing has officially made it to the scene. Sluggernaut is in fact very powerful and durable. Its first attempt in attacking is to swing its mace shell thing, which is already easy to leap over. But it's only the beginning of its many abilities. Its second attack is to scratch with its mandibles, an attack it uses if I get too close. And worse still, it ejects a terrifying looking appendage from its mouth. It also manages to grab its enemies with it. I'm at least lucky it doesn't use it 24/7. A minute later, this giraffe calf emerges from the massive lump of snow, with small patches of snow on its head. It is unfortunately close to the sluggernaut.
And just like that, Brawn triumphs over, Brawn.
Well, I suppose if it weren't for the calf, I wouldn't have made it. I am thankful for the little guy. I'll honor that very well. Now to get to the next level. Glacier Lake has to be probably one of the most empty levels by far. Don't get me wrong, it looks very nice. But there isn't any enemies or fauna. Even the music isn't there. 30 seconds later and something is probably going to happen. And plot twist. This isn't a surface level. It's underwater. The background is a mix of most underwater levels with a background, and some of the less usual, with water that makes it hard to see. The music is a sort of gentle violin-like theme, one that seems to fit such a beautiful environment. It really does take a turn from a surface ice lake to a subterranean ice lake with light from the top. Especially when one of my favorite things was lakes, rivers, and oceans. I always loved all the great things in the oceans, with unique and giant sunfish, and small and terrifying anglers. The sea is one thing I've always liked. It's hard to describe why. Even in the past, marine life was unique. From the armored underwater insects, armored fish, and sharks, to large marine reptiles, like plesiosaurs and mosasaurs, and the first whales. It just brings this smile to me. Something satisfying to me. It's just so amazing to see these things. This level is no different. Even the fauna is unique, ranging from small to large. In particular is the giant fish with a big gaping mouth. It looks like it would attack, but doesn't. It is part of a humble lake. Just a magnificent sight, as all I can say. At least 1 minute later, everything swam off, and a pair of circles are glowing. I think this is another boss fight. And from the water emerges the large crayfish, known as Jenga, a rather intimidating creature, and probably the swiftest yet. Its first attack is to leap forward with its anglerfish-like mouth open, in an attempt to bite and cause bleeding. The second is to grip onto its target. Getting it to let go of you is way much of a challenge. And that isn't even the end of its advantages. It literally has the most disgustingly insane reflexes. It keeps its eyes locked onto the enemy, Therefore any attempted attacks outside of its claw grip misses, because it constantly darts away. But even then I must either kill it, or make it leave me alone. Luckily the fight doesn't last long. I do manage to fight it off. But instead of dying, it breaks through the ice and retreats. I don't think any boss has been retreating since that encounter with Megama. I suppose this is something the fauna will do. Now that the third level is completed, I am going to move on to fighting the first boss monster. The first adversary of the map, and the only one that moves around, is the Aqua monster. Before I talk more about the battle, I want to talk about the odd mechanic here. For some reason when it starts, red starts off in his marine form, and I am not able to change for during battle. This is probably an indication that the battle takes place underwater, which also explains how the Sando is floating. Speaking of which, is quite stubborn in certain situations. In one, if I melee attack it while it's biting, it doesn't let go until 20 seconds later. And it will also go as far as to run through the ranged attacks. Every time it does this it does get damaged, albeit at less than you'd expect. The Sando Aqua is able to tank attacks like it's nothing. Nonetheless it is still simple to face off. And I managed to beat the enemy senseless. After that is now time to get to the next stage. Frozen Cave isn't exactly like the previous levels. The ground and roof are the same. Most essentially a roof, housing everything inside, whilst most previous levels were in a more open area that hadn't any roofs. The music is similar to the Cold Lands, a tone that sounded like a xylophone and light tapping sounds. But here it is more different, more mysterious sounding. The feeling of treading into the unknown. The fauna consists of the ice bug from the Cold Lands. Here on the other hand, there is far more, crawling across the floors, walls and the ceiling, scrapping their fangs on the ice, to attempt to scrounge a living from inside the frost. Later on one of the bugs starts aiming its stingers, presumably a sign of self-defense. But when it does, Skitch appears and gets in between the two. He seems to do this a lot when it comes to fauna. I'd suppose it's his way of preventing any sort of conflict from happening. I'm glad that he is, because I haven't any idea what kinds of infections these creatures could inflict. 30 seconds later and the level is completed with no encounters with any enemies or bosses. My next step is to fight the second boss monster. The second enemy is known as Perfect Chaos, a very large and tanky opponent. Much like the Sando Aqua monster, Perfect Chaos is based around water. The large creature doesn't move at all. If I had to suppose anything, it's that it lives at the surface. Despite being completely immobile, its attacks still pose a threat. One is obviously to swipe at its enemies with its limbs, but the ranged attacks are even more deadly. One is to shoot projectiles that stab into whatever it flies at. The other is a powerful mouth beam, one with a further range in comparison to most beam attacks. I have at least figured out its weak spot. Constantly attacking at its brain lowers its health more effectively. With that figured out, I managed to defeat Perfect Chaos. My next step is to go to another level. Snowman's Sky may have to be probably one of the best levels. The background is a whole mountain range, and ground is also mountains. But one of the best parts may have to be the music. It's a very happy feeling theme, one that could give someone the courage to get through the problems. One of the most beautiful themes this far. The level itself has a lot of massive gaps between platforms, meaning you'd have to either leap far enough or fly to get across them. It makes a challenging but fun concept. The map has no enemies, and only fauna. That fauna is the large birds, flying around and some feeding their chicks. A happy sign of the game being alive. One that at least draws a smile to my face. Later on one large bird is standing at this rock. With the second to last level complete, and another battery mech found, it's time for the next part of this mission. The last new level is the Ice Town. A quite pleasant area. It's almost similar to the Frozen Cave, but here the ice pillars are home for the Favorinu that live in the cave. The music also very humble sounding, making a nice feeling. Like in the Frozen Cave, Skitch appears in the level, which at least feels nice to see. By the end of the stage is one big ice pillar with a doorway. From what I can suppose, it might happen to be the home of Skitch.
And now we've finally reached our destination.
The interior is very calming. The music as well. It makes for a nice ambience. But anyways, back to the main story here. Skitch then decides to sit down. Something I wouldn't argue about. He did probably have a long day that has made him exhausted.
After this long day, I should have a calm break. With that said, we should wait here for a while. I also think you're probably wondering why I have feelings. The reason is very odd. At least 9 years before now, I was like everyone else. I used to walk around instead of gliding across the ground. But for me, specifically, it wasn't permanent. That night a ferocious blizzard arrived, and it was too difficult to see where I was going, or what was nearby. I had eventually passed out from exhaustion, not being able to wait until the storm was over. After the blizzard had finished, I had survived, but not without alarms. My ankles had been frostbitten to the point where they had to be amputated. At that point I could only walk on stubs. A few days later, someone had given me something special. The wheels that had advanced my own mobility. At that point in time, I had eventually went as far as to gain my place now.
Well, after hearing this whole origin, I'm genuinely glad that you have managed to get this far.
To be fair, that story did start off very sad. But in the end, Skitch did get to live happily. But it unfortunately isn't happily ever after just yet. Especially with everything that is happening now. Hopefully soon. Will this all be over?
We might have to wait here for a while. There's been a cave on the other side. It might take a while for it to fix it.
I could try and remove that problem.
But if you believe you can open the cave, then be my guest.
Yes, we could use that attempt. Even if it doesn't work, we could still make it. So this must be the cave-in. Doesn't look like the worst thing possible.
This should be easier than snapping a brick.
It was amazing to see that pile of ice get pulled apart. Each chunk flying off. And opening the gateway to the other side.
Well, time to go, not second to waste.
The next level is the Blue Temple. I have never played this level before. Nor had I hoped to. But I must. As I arrive, my greeting is the 12 seconds vocalization that is. The unforgiving cold. With it are the many heads hanging across the hall. But this time, the level might be shorter thanks to the pace that Skitch can have. But for now, that pace will be held down until necessary. Plus the fact that these places probably have powerful and unknown forces hiding. And waiting. Who knows what rests here? Best choice would be to not mess around. But aside from that, since this is like the levels with no enemies, it's likely that I'll get to live. Right? How wrong I am. The statue faces start coming to life and attacking Skitch. And they hit hard. My only good option is to flee. With my fight or flight response activated, I start quickly moving away from the gargoyles. I use the speed to my advantage. 30 seconds and the level is over. After that terrible moment, I am sweating all over. I think I'm gonna take quick break. Then, I'll fight the artifact. Right. I am ready for the second artifact. I start the level and it's the small shrew from Cold Lands. But it's probably not gonna be here for very long.
Well, I'm surprised seeing you all here, including whether you are.
Well, we've never met before, so I can't argue.
Well, whoever you aren't going to be lasting very long.
Well, enough talk. Have at whatever the hell it is.
Fair enough. Enjoy the frost.
And along with his hailing blizzard, and his powers brought to completion, a Sassicle awakens. The creature staring down at its victims. Its theme is actually and genuinely awesome. It kind of dethrones Karaskorgan's theme if anything. But even then, it is still an annoying enemy. Its first attack is pulling out an icicle and using it as a shank. It can also freeze breath, turning its enemies into ice. But we aren't gonna be as easy to get rid of. With enough scratches, shots, and burns, the large ice golem will soon meet its maker.
Second artifact again. We are another step closer to the end.
You have done very amazing in this trying time, Sketch. Your assistance shall be greatly remembered.
I'm not gonna lie. All that hard work sure did pay off in the end. I wish you all very good luck on the next planet. I hope to see you all after this mission is finished.